Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Biz Apps with Blake. And today we're going to be talking about Power Apps. It can be very easy to just jump headfirst into Power Apps with either a paid subscription, your developer plan, or even your embedded use rights that you get through Office 365 or Microsoft 365 licensing. However, there are some things that you may want to consider before you take that first step, such as making sure that you are developing in the right environment or the most appropriate environment, and making sure that you have the right license for the job. So, in order to facilitate that discussion, I actually sat down with Sean from Untethered 365 last week to talk about just that. Let's roll the clip. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. On our episode today, I am super excited to have Sean on. We have some very interesting topics that we want to be able to cover with you all. Sean, tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a contractor at Microsoft. I lead a small team in the Power Platform, also solutions architect. As much as I love tech, the main thing I love is training. So what I do is take a lot of students who are new to the Power Platform or just know a couple technologies, and I figure out how to get them to the solutions architect level. I got a great program for that. It's communal. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that you and I both share that passion for helping people get off the ground, but our backgrounds are a little bit different. Whereas I've only stepped into this really over the past several years and really took liking to it because of its complexity and the challenge and the flexibility of a solution like this. But to be honest to everyone here watching, and I don't think I've ever said this, I had to take all of my programming classes twice in college. But Sean, you come from a pro dev background, right?
Yeah, I did Dynamics 365 before Power Platform was even a thing 10 years ago. I did the C Sharp. I did Python, Vue, PHP. I did all kinds of stuff, all of which to say I'm back in Power Platform. And I went all the levels of pro code, but I ended up back in low code. And that's just what I see the future as.
I think so. I saw some article the other day asking people to start abandoning languages like C and C++. I guess there's starting to be some problems maintaining things that have been around that long, but I certainly learned C++ back in the day. VB.net, which actually helped me because I feel like that's actually very similar to a Canvas app. But shout out to
Yeah,
anyone out there, .NET
that
developers.
what I don't know. C++. My hat's off to you that you learned that. That is a mountain to climb. On my end, I never regretted learning the languages I did. I kind of wished I learned less so I could have stayed in one more. However, just as you know, the fundamental programming concepts, once you learn those, you still have to know those to do low code. Low code just removes all the configuration and knowing parts of the job, but you still have to understand how software works.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like you said, things like functions, especially, it's like, hey, if you're going to repeat this section of code, you should make it its own thing so that you can reuse that thing later and not have to continue to retype the thing. It is about application efficiency. And, that is one of the frustrations I do hear from people who are starting in the low code space. They build a Power App or they build something in Power Automate and they're like, this thing takes forever. But that's might be a valid criticism, but you also don't know until you start picking apart someone's code, right?
Yeah. In that case, I'm curious, Blake, did they just kind of give up there, or did they understand, do they blame the system, or are they like, maybe something's wrong with what I did?
Do you think anyone in tech ever really reflects on thinking that what they did was wrong?
I
But
mean, I like to think I do, but yeah, I'm curious about that because I see a lot of kind of distaste for it and dislike. They're like, "Oh, this is sold as so easy." I mean, it is really easy, but then it's like those little nuances that get tricky, and I see some blame towards the program when really there's a lot of tutorials and information about how to make it run faster, how to get out of this situation, but they're quick to blame and just assume it's just slow regardless.
yeah, I do think that is a challenge, and I think that some of these people come from pro code dev backgrounds, and for some of these people, I think that's a real badge of honor. You know what I mean? Like you said, I spent 20 years in whatever language, and so it is very difficult, I think, for some people to come to terms. that low code might be the future in some of these things, and it just causes frustration, when there's some unfamiliarity with the application, the interface, and some of that stuff. So that's my best guess as to what's going wrong.
Yeah, it's also, I think you nailed it. It's ego. If like it used to take so long to learn JavaScript, SQL, normalizing a database, and then performance, and then whether you use an integer or a GUID and how that slows down the system, you learn all this valuable stuff. And then now Dataverse, some intern can build the same thing you did with like a couple months. Maybe they might not know some optimization things. Maybe they might miss a couple best practices, but they can make a full-fledged application that's great for a small to medium-sized business. And that took you for years to do. And now you have to learn the platform that this kid picked up in a couple months, or someone just picked up on a couple months. And I think that's change is hard. I feel for them because that was me, but it's if it lowers the bar for people with no software background to get up and running so fast, I would never want them to go through what I had to do to like
Oh,
learn pro code.
yeah, yeah, no, I'm the same way. Like you said, banging your head against the desk for, trying to remember this one particular like sequel. It's like, oh man, is this inner join or outer join? Like, I don't remember right now. But you said something that I think is a perfect segue into sort of today's main topic, Sean. And that's, you said that this is really kind of supposed to be low code. And I think that if you're using some of the little bit of Copilot that gets in there, it's more low code. Or if you're doing something like a really simple 3-screen Canvas app, it can be pretty low code. I find model driven apps to be a little less low code, and on the automate side, it really just kind of depends. I've done some AI builder stuff that was simple and some that was a little more complicated. But the reason this ties in is because before we get started, right? Before you even think about building your first application, there's things you need to do and things you need to think about, right? And the two I kind of had in mind was the plan, right? So like what kind of license or plan do I need? Because there are many. And then how should I be building this? Because I've seen many clients who go in and they've got 4 or 5 things in the default environment. And I really personally, without having the pro code background of you, not without having some of the ALM background of you, um, I'm just not sure it's the greatest idea. So, which topic do you want to start with? Environments or licensing?
Environments or licensing? You're gonna be kind of running the game on licensing. I have to always look up myself, but I know you speak this all day. I would love to talk more on the environments aspect and also some of the issues you're seeing where your clients are doing too much in an environment, and right away you're like spider sense is a little concerned about what they're doing, or like whatever questions they're bringing you, Blake, on that front.
Yeah, sure, sure. So let's hop into environments, and I got my handy references up over here. You know all of this, but viewers at home might not know all of this. You have your production environment, you have a default environment. You can do a sandbox environment, you can do a trial environment, you can do a developer environment, and then you can do Dataverse for Teams, which is actually a topic I try and avoid. But I think we'll stick with probably the small handful of the most prominent ones here today. So let's talk environments. Let's start with the default environment because everyone has one.
Yeah. So on that one, what I see companies do is when they're just kind of starting out, you have your one main default environment. If your company is like 5 people, like under, and you want to cowboy it and do everything there, and you don't care about the fact that you might make something and then you can't undo it, that's fine. Like best practices exist, but like you have to convince me. Just because it has the word best practices doesn't necessarily mean you have to follow them if it doesn't fit your context. If you're going to get any more past 5 users, you're going to need to have your development environment, your UAT environment, and your production environment. However, again, Blake, to your point of if you're a small company, these environments are going to get expensive. The more environments you add, I'd have to check again, but it's going to be a good amount of gigabytes just to make it,
Uh,
just to hit create on that,
yep,
and
a
that's going to
gig
start
per
taking up storage.
Dataverse or a
Hmm.
gig just to stand up Dataverse. Yep.
Just a state of metaverse, exactly. So in an ideal case, you have your dev, your QA, and your prod. However, another thing to consider is I like to get a fourth environment, and this is I learned this back when I was at Inside Automations with Dustin Sitton. They call it like a canary. I don't know what terms they're using now, but basically it's a place where let's go blow it up. It's something where you can go there and install some wild plugins. The point of the environment is that at any point in the month, I can go override it. I can go take my dev environment and copy it over. Like, don't become attached to the data there. Obviously communicate, but if you're going to install like some kind of MailChimp plugin or something else and you don't know how it's going to behave, you're going to want that kind of canary environment. The one thing I've also seen it called like experimental, whatever you want to call it. Another one is devs make their own personal environment. Terrific. Like, go for it. It's free. You get it right away. And the only issue with that is, well, you can't do dynamics in there. You can't do a lot of other more like enterprise related tools in that environment. And then inviting others can be a little trickier. And so it's just kind of like you in this little space. It's fun to test out little stuff. But what's nice to have about this experimental environment is because you can copy over some of your real data, your real tables, all of your real tables and tables. You probably don't want your developers exporting that and importing that into their own local environment. So that's why I've seen that experimental environment as being one that's really underutilized.
Yeah, I could see that. It's like in IT sec, if you're gonna plug in something questionable to your machine, maybe you do that in a virtual machine or something,
Right.
just in case it goes horribly, horribly wrong. But I think you set up some really good points. I've not ever actually considered the idea of, like you said, this canary environment before, but it makes sense. It's like, hey, this is dev, but or test, but maybe a little more extreme. Test is the intent to move to prod, not the intent of, hey, let's see how wild we can go. But I think that's a pretty interesting concept. There are some limitations to a default environment, though, that Microsoft outlines. It's limited to a terabyte of storage capacity itself, which is probably not a problem for most people in the mid-market space, but it only has the following capacity included by default: 3 gigs of Dataverse, 3 gigs of file, and 1 gig of log, which is significantly smaller than any production environment you'd set up if you had a paid license. But is 3 gigs enough? Is that, you said 5 users, right? So it's like, by the time I'm thinking about is it kind of a natural progression? I guess, is that what I'm asking? By the time you get to 5 users, should you also be thinking, is 3 gigs maybe not enough for what I'm doing?
Right. I picked 5 because if I say like, I'm happy you addressed that, like a terabyte of data, I think most people have a hard time imagining that. Few companies can run millions of records and like process all that and handle that kind of consumption on just like 5 people running the
Yeah.
company. When you get into that high amount, you usually have a larger team. So in that case, I've only seen companies successfully stay in the default environment when they're not really that data heavy, but they want to leverage some of Dataverse, but just that's not kind of the main part of their business. When it becomes the main part of their business, when they're doing time tracking, invoices, all of that, then they're going to be moving onto a production environment. But if they're 5 to 10 and they're like, oh, I just kind of want to just maintain some of our maybe inventory here, just they're either experimenting before they get into the production level and they want to really understand Dataverse, or they're trying to like keep it small and they're like, I want something that's better than Excel or better than SharePoint. And I really like how Dataverse lets me see all this stuff and filter on it, which is the main benefit a lot of companies get out of it.
Yeah, yeah, and and one thing I know when we were sort of prepping for this call and chatting off to the side, Sean, one thing that we talked about is Microsoft actually has this table, and I'll make sure to either drop it in the video description or put it up here on the screen at some point. But they have some defining criteria, I would say, more like guidelines really, of when to use what. And they talk about the default environment being good for, like you said, up to about 10 users. Um, with non-confidential information. I think that's definitely important, with no monetary impact to the business. I think that really goes, hand in hand with confidentiality. and that it doesn't require any sort of ALM. So I think that's a pretty good guideline, but you do risk, in my opinion, running into problems sometimes with building in default. And that's going to bring me to the idea of importing and exporting solutions, because this is also a challenge you'll have to know if you sign up for a developer environment, right? Developer environment is not intended for production use, but that doesn't mean that's the way it always happens.
Mhm.
So when we think about these two types of probably your more specific environments, right? Default, like you said, which is its own thing because everyone gets one, but then developer, which a lot of people who are following best practices, like dev best practices, might use. I mean, you're having to move solutions. So have we already upped the complexity of building apps a little bit from beyond this, hey, just come join us and be a citizen developer?
Yeah, fantastic question. I think I'm understanding it as just the general of how do we demystify this developer versus sandbox and between these two environments, and what do people need to know? And then can you kind of circumvent the fact that it's a developer environment and still use that for like day-to-day businesses? I mean, sure, there's nothing that's going to penalize you except exactly what you said, Blake, which is you're going to be making irreversible changes. And then the only way to undo it is to back up that whole environment from 2 days ago, and then you lose everything you did now. So doing something like ALM, like application lifecycle management, being able to move your code from environment to environment allows you to have that history and allows you to be like, oh, whoopsie, I didn't want that. Let me go uninstall what I just did. With the developer environment, if you make an environment of type developer, you're only going to allow admins in there. Like it's not a sandbox. You can't cherry pick people's privileges. So again, 5-person company, I assume you trust everyone and they kind of know what they're doing. However, the plus side, and especially getting into ALM and why they made it a little more confusing, is something I see underutilized, and they're starting to advertise it more, is data pipelines. And then these Power Apps pipelines for environments are awesome, because before you would have to like export your solution. A solution is just a packaging of like your flows, your tables, whatever. You'd export in this nice container, you'd move it into your production environment or what have you, and then it's just a lot of clicking, importing, waiting, getting into issues, all this stuff. And then you just export this container like, well, I want to store it somewhere in case I need it later, so I'm just going to go throw it up into Azure somewhere. So it'd be cumbersome. Or you'd hire a pro code team and they build you these complicated, advanced Azure C# pipelines that automatically do everything and then read everything in the container. And it was just like, it always seemed like too much, because like the pro coders are storing all your solutions via code, and then they're also building you this nice pipeline, but they're now your gatekeepers. And let's be real, if you're hiring them, it's because you don't know C#. And it's like, why do you have to? It's what you were talking about, Blake, of like, I want it to be easier for me. I want it to be low code. That's the point. So it's like I have the C# option, or I have this export option, then I have to do everything myself. What I love about data pipelines is it bridges the gap. It's in the middle. Once you set them up, it's as simple as like click import and it'll do all that for you. It stores, it backs up all your solutions for you. It's awesome. The caveats are, though, you can't use it in a default environment. It needs to be a developer environment, and then you need a separate environment to actually hold the solutions, and then obviously your third environment that you're deploying to. This is why I assume Microsoft came out with that new developer kind of environment, because it confused me first. I'm like, how is this different than Sandbox? I'm like, oh, you're trying to get us more into pipelines, is how I understood it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a developer plan for a while, signed up, just through, Googling, hey, developer plan and getting it that way. But you do see, I think I was in an environment once and I can't find the documentation on it, so I don't know if I'm going crazy or not. But it says basically, if you try and build an app that's going to use premium connectors, in order for you to be able to test or POC that, it'll throw it into a dev environment for you now because you have access to some of that stuff. Like I said, maybe it was a hallucination, maybe it's real, But yeah, I think of developer environments like you said, it's a personal productivity environment. I can play around, I can do whatever I want. It can be a kind of a volatile space, if you want it to. Or like you said, if you intend to have a proper procedure for app creation at your organization, maybe your developers are more serious than I am when I go in there and just sort of cobble together some experiments, if you will. But you bring us into our other two environments we really need to touch on. So thinking about data pipelines, thinking about dev and default, let's talk about sandbox.
It's great. It's like one of the first environments, obviously, I worked with 10 years ago. It's nice. It gives you a lot more flexibility because you can invite anyone into it. What is also awesome is your ability to, when we were talking in the beginning about maybe you have your developer environment, and developer environment doesn't necessarily mean it's a type developer, as it's just the name for it. It could also be a type sandbox. And then you have a different sandbox, that experimental environment. What's nice is you can copy one over the other. You can override them, which can be really helpful when your deployments are going poorly, you can't get them into production, and you're just like losing it. And sometimes the question comes up, is the environment itself has an issue? And the only way to prove that is if you can take something like production or a different environment that's a clone of it, and you can copy it over these other environments. But in those cases, they
Good
need
point.
to be sandboxed. I haven't touched the documentation a little bit on this, but last time I checked, you can't just copy over a production environment. You have to convert it. So what's nice about these sandbox environments is they assume you want to be able to copy over them if you want to, which is nice. I can copy over production, test some deployments into this other experimental environment or whatever environment I want. And then once, if that works, I know that the production environment itself has an issue. So when I raise my Microsoft ticket, I can go say, like, it works in this environment. That's a copy of prod. Help me out here. What's the issue with prod?
That's I mean, that's honestly $1 million advice right there. I mean, it's a good example, and I I tend to agree. I think that if you are serious about power apps or power platform really in any capacity in your workplace, spend the gigabyte of Dataverse database capacity. Gosh, say that 3 times fast. Spend the gigabyte to stand up Dataverse and have this environment do yourselves this favor, right? And have this environment, because it's a lot better than flying by the seat of your pants and prod. Like you said, there's some advantages over dev, and it's certainly a lot better than default for a lot of this stuff just because of flexibility. So if we have dev and we have sandbox slash test, as it's traditionally might be called in some spaces,
Mhm.
that brings us to prod. So let's talk about the wins and whys of prod, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, prod is what I've noticed. Don't quote me on this. I don't think it's actually documented. It's just something I've noticed is I feel like it runs a little faster. I'm sure someone at Microsoft will be like, nope, nope, it doesn't. It runs as fast as all the other ones. I've personally kind of noticed that a little bit. It's nice. It's harder. You get a lot more powers with it in the sense that you can't override things as easily, which is awesome. I'm starting to see some other amazing things come out with it where this is getting too in the weeds, but when you make customizations in prod, you're never supposed to. You're supposed to do it in dev, make your little changes, then deploy them into the solution, and then hopefully use pipelines, and then you can migrate it to the production environment. Some of the other awesome things I'm seeing introduced, and I believe it's available for production as well as other environments, is the fact that now they've noticed so many people butchering production environments by doing all their changes there instead of doing it in the developer environment
Yeah.
and then migrating it over. What's nice is, and I don't know if it's in preview, but it's coming out where you now can block these unmanaged changes. You can pretty much block changes in the production environment that did not come from the proper solution pipeline, which is really, really nice if you have developers who maybe are misunderstanding how solutions and environments work. If they try to hack it up, they can't. It'll stop them. Um, so those are some of the immediate benefits I see of it, and it's also has a do not mess with this environment unless you know what you're doing
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, there's lots of things coming down the pipeline to sort of reinforce this. I mean, managed environments and some of this other stuff came out recently. Sometimes that feels like a cash grab for paid licensing a little bit,
Mhm.
but that's neither here nor there. I agree though. I think that you do have to be very careful and you have to be very smart about how you use sandbox and how you use prod. But setting up a data pipeline, I mean, do you feel like is this overwhelming? Is this cumbersome? Again, have we traversed a little bit outside of low code when we're setting up entire pipelines? I mean, is this something like a COE starter kit can help with, or is that too much for even that?
Yeah, yeah. The COE starter kit, it has a lot of pieces of it. I haven't even explored them fully. What I've noticed is the COE starter kit, I feel like if you have a developer team that really understands it and is going to introduce that to your company and your developers, like, awesome, go for it. But the companies I see that are more like do it yourself Google arounders, they don't come across the starter kit, I feel like, until they need it. They
Right.
run into issues of like, man, who I want to know which flows this user owns. I want to know of these flows, how are they all connected to each other? What is their general performance? Like, there's got to be a tool for that. And they go in the admin center and they get a little lost, and it's not, the admin center isn't really made to find that easily. And they start Googling around, sorry, binging around, and then they come across the starter kit, and they see, oh, the starter kit actually provides me this like nice dashboard into like all my environments, my flows, and what they're doing, and then they get into starter kit. I Unless you're very comfortable with environments and flows and Dataverse in general, like I'd move on to starter kit kind of when you're ready. It's
Gotcha.
like you'll know you're ready because you're going to be Googling these problems and it'll be suggesting the starter kit, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I found from same for me. Like, I've started on this journey a long time ago, and it was maybe a year in before I even knew about it because, like you said, because my Power Apps journey just wasn't that serious yet.
mhm.
So that's what I saw. The one environment I want to touch on real quick, just because it's just not worth a lot to me, but I understand that people want something like this, which is why I think it gets accommodated, are like trial environments. And I think it's because people mistake the intent of a trial environment for a dev or for a sandbox. It's not meant for evaluation on that level. I see trial as I just need to be able to poke around. Like if I was going to buy a professional camera, right? I mean, we all know I'm buying it online, probably. But
Yeah.
you know what I'm doing? I'm going to Best Buy to get the touch and feel of the camera. You know, that's the way I see trial, right? Hey, this is just so I can touch and feel and make sure that the features are there. But this isn't something super serious, because I'm not going to walk out of the store with it. Um, so that happens. But I want to shift into another question. Now that we've kind of covered some of the environments, and we touched on this a little bit, I'm going to shift into licensing for a minute because there's really a few ways to do, and I'm going to stick with Power Apps, I think, for today. But
Mhm.
there's a few ways to do Power Apps. There is the Power Apps Premium, which is, your Cadillac of Power Apps licenses. Hey, this is the buy it, you can do anything. But you still have, and they don't put it on the website anymore, but you still have a Power Apps per app license for
Mhm.
single use apps. But then you also have that pesky developer plan. So, you know, if I'm a developer, like $1 million question I thought of a long time ago is if I'm a developer, do I can I get away with just using my developer plan or should I get a paid license? And the answer is I don't know if I know enough to know.
Yeah. So this gets tricky. I think one developer, like whether they need it, like they're going to need their premium license to do their work. Like that's the end of that. And then if the developer plan comes with it, like terrific, you're fine. I think the harder questions I see for companies is okay, they understand and you can convince them the developer needs to do their work, so give them whatever licenses they need. Where it
Yeah.
gets tricky is like my sales team has like two head honchos that are like entering the data or reviewing it, But then I have these three other ones that are kind of making calls, and they're the ones discussing with prospects. They will be using flows, and they will be engaging with apps that are connected to premium features. Do they need licenses? And then, like, what do I need to and then not need to pay for? I think those are the lot of questions that I try to help advise with, and that's where it gets really murky, because there's a lot of ways to for lack of better words, like cheat. And I see some of, like, even MVPs accidentally suggest these strategies. I'm guilty myself of not fully knowing, and that's why I try to read about the licensing so I don't mess this up. But it's this concept of multiplexing, which is you're
Yes.
reusing licenses illegally in a way you're not supposed to. Like, a simple example is Power Automate. You can make a flow run under an admin, run under a specific user instead of running under whichever user is currently using that. If you use that, then you can remove all the users, and then they kind of technically don't need their own licenses. I'm not going to go into details because I don't want to share how to cheat. However, it's one of those things that people think like, oh, this is fine. I see this recommended all over the place on forums, and it's one of those situations where you have to be careful, because if your end users are engaging with premium features, they need to be paying for it. And so when you do something like that, you can get in trouble for it and you can get audited. In those kind of situations, I think it's rethinking how the business interacts with the system and who actually needs access and then, like, who doesn't. Can you make, like, a Canvas app or some app that is just for those three users that are not going to be heavy into the Dataverse dynamics aspect? Can you separate that out and only give them access to, like, certain tables that they need to interact with while still following the multiplexing rules? And then your key users, the ones that are going to be doing all the work, like the developers you said, they're the ones who need their premium licenses. The other ones to look into, because again, as you put it, it's not very clear, is like the per app license, per flow. There's also license options where how often the user logs in, they're going to be charged differently than someone who has the license all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It can get really complicated. And I can tell you, based on personal experience, uh, if your advice is just keep going till you hit the error message that you need a paid license, uh, people don't like that. I think it works for 1 and 2 user scenarios, but yeah, I understand that when you get into a 20 user scenario, you can't just worry about when everyone is going to need a license. Or you can't. You have to plan ahead, I guess is what I'm saying. When you reach that stage, but in a way, I mean, it's kind of true. Like you said, it can be really hard because I don't want anyone to overpay. I don't want anyone to overbuy in licenses. Microsoft doesn't give any rebates or rewards for managing the best overhead on your licensing or Dataverse or anything. Um, but at the same time, don't I want to help you maximize your value, right, for your licenses, for what you're getting. And that's one thing I try and deliver and articulate is like, hey, you know what? Like you said, if you have a Power Apps premium license, right? Like, and you can make all these applications, put that to good use. Or sometimes even the fact that like a Power Automate premium, Power Apps premium, a couple other things come with AI builder credits. Don't leave those just sitting on the table. Like AI Builder is, like I said, sometimes not that hard. And you can do, I mean, 5,000 credits, I think, on some of the Power Automate licenses is not a small amount. You could do a lot of invoice processing for 5,000 credits. So there's definitely some things. And I think that, another good point about just buying the paid license instead of just having dev is the fact that you're going to start to accrue some Dataverse storage
Mhm.
capacity per license that way. Uh, but if it goes back to the top of the call, one thing you said sort of at the very beginning, if you have dev, right, which we'll just say is the developer
Mhm.
environment, if you have test, which is your sandbox
Mhm.
environment, and then you have prod or production, there's nothing wrong with having a developer license for your developer and letting them have a paid license, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm also curious, in your experience, Blake, how tricky is it for customers to navigate licensing? Like of all the questions you get about these tools, what percentage are licensing?
You know, over half,
I thought
probably.
so. I thought
Yeah,
so.
over half. It's really tricky. Uh, the licensing guide does a phenomenal job of explaining. However, if you, it's like the COE starter kit. If you don't know to look for it, you don't know. And even if you do, not everyone wants to read like 64 pages just to get an answer. You know what I mean? A 10 a 10-second question should only require a 10-second answer. It shouldn't require like looking through something for 10 minutes. It's not an efficient use of time. I keep hoping that someone will just build a licensing chatbot, but it honestly, it honestly, you could, right? But it moves so fast, and there are so many little caveats and gotchas here and there that it would still be hard, like you said, because hey, sometimes these bots end up lying, and maybe they end up encouraging you to multiplex. They're like, well, you could build a flow that'll send this out to each person, and then it can send it back through the flow, and it's like, you're really pushing your luck on something like that, depending on where it's writing to or writing or coming from. So eh, I think there could be a bot, I guess is what I'm saying, but it is tricky, and especially since the name changes, I will say that you have to have a history degree. You have to understand the lineage of these things. You have to understand that Power Apps Premium was Power Apps per user was Power Apps Plan 2. And so by the time you go through that, some of these people, they are moving into NCE licensing or something like that, and they're still on like a Power Apps Plan 2 or something. And so everyone needs to know,
Mhm.
hey, what's the equivalent? That's what they want. What's the equivalent? Or I want to do this. What do I need to buy? It's just pretty simple licensing questions. And I get it. They don't want to look through the guide. But I'm always happy to talk about licensing. So, for anyone
My
out there.
hat's off to you. Like I have to, I'm doing a lot of development. I can't always keep up with it. I just imagine the level of questions I get on it, you have to be doubled about it. And it's like they're going to get confused from like, okay, this works in Power Apps. Oh, now I went to Power BI. Wait, that has a different licensing model. Like that is like,
The fact that there's not a
thank you for taking care of that, is what I'm saying.
the fact that there's not a Power BI licensing guide, and I think at one point there was, or a calculator or something. I can't find it. It existed like 5 years ago, I think. But the fact that there's not a Power BI licensing guide, Microsoft, if you're listening, is a crime, because it is as hard to understand for users as Power Apps and Power Automate. And then you started introducing terms like Fabric, and now people don't know the difference in Fabric and Power BI. That might be another fun conversation for another day. But Sean, I know you got to run here soon, my friend. So just remind everyone, how they can catch you, what kind of projects you're working on, anything exciting you want to share.
Yeah, I'm all about taking average or beginner developers. When I say average, relatively 1 to 2 years, maybe no 1 to 2 technologies, and they want to become solutions architects. They pretty much, I want to help people make more money and work less. So that's why I got this Architects Accelerator program. It's at untethered365.com. I picked a name that most people can't pronounce, but I already bought the domain.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm sad I didn't think of it sooner. I would have squatted on it and made you pay me for your domain. But like you said, no one would have ever guessed Untethered 365. I think it sounds good. I think it
Thank
sounds
you.
extreme. It's like Untethered 365. So, but yeah, hopefully you heard it here, and you'll go navigate over there. Check out Sean's content. I know that he's got a ton of good stuff out there on YouTube. He's got that real good production quality, as you can tell by his green screen behind him. So he's out there doing the good thumbnails and all that stuff. But Sean, thank you so much for spending part of your day here with me, and we'll catch you when this episode airs. Okay.
For sure. Thanks so much, Blake. Thanks for educating everyone. I watch your channel to keep up to date.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Sean. And folks, for those of you watching, we will see you soon. Well, that's about all of the excitement that we have for today. Make sure that if you're not already following me here on YouTube, that you give me a follow. Head on over to Sean's website at untethered365.com and make sure that you're giving Sean a follow as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.